Hey, almost every Minecraft builder loves to throw this word around.
Texturing.
But there's a pretty big misconception, so let me explain and show you exactly how to improve your Minecraft building almost instantly. In traditional art, texture is a visual sense of how an object and a work of art feels. So if you drew a cat, in order for it to have texture, it needs to look like it feels fluffy. But the blocks in Minecraft already have texture, so if we really want texture, we would use the cobblestone because it looks like it feels like stones, right? Well, sort of. When builders talk about texturing, really what we mean is coloring. We use blocks as colors, not textures. This is the most important part of this video, so let me give you a little example. When you get far away from a block, you see less and less of the texture. It starts to become a solid color, and you can't really tell that this is cobblestone at a certain distance, just like how you can't tell that this is diamond ore. What if I told you that these two blocks are the exact same color? Seriously, when you back up and look, the color of crafting tables and netherrack gold ore are almost identical. Even though one has dark geometric lines and the other has very organic shaped bright gold spots, you can only tell the difference when you're really close up. This villager house uses cobblestone in the bottom layer, and that makes sense because of the scale. We're close enough to the house to see that this is a bunch of stones packed together. But when we look at this build that I made with my friend Painter, we can't see the cobbled texture because it's too far away. We're just seeing a gray color, which looks really boring. So as a builder, I don't texture, I color our stone with other blocks, which are really just colors at this distance, and now our stone is way more appealing, even though these blocks don't look like stone close up. The sooner you start using blocks like this rather than this, you're going to start to improve really quickly. So how do you texture a build? Well, before texture comes shading. Shading refers to the darkening or coloring in art with lines or blocks of color. So in a drawing of a cat, for example, it's shaded with lines of color which create texture. It looks fluffy because of how it's shaded. In Minecraft, we can shade with lines of color, gradually getting darker going up, down. You can shade to the side, you can shade diagonally too if you're really going bananas. You can shade in multiple directions at once too, with a starting point in the middle, getting darker one block at a time going outwards. Or you can do the opposite of shading, which is called tinting. Now here's the first hard part. I want our shading to fit inside of this box and have it go from light here to dark here. So we can't get darker one block at a time, we have to skip some. So how's that going to work? How do we know what blocks to skip? Well, you don't actually skip any blocks, you just put less of each. It's easier if I just show you. In a loose circular pattern, I'm using my lightest colors around the middle block, but not only the next lightest block, my two next lightest blocks. Then another layer out, I'm using slightly darker blocks, but not a solid line of one block, I'm using 2 or 3 of them, and then the last layer out, I'm using our darkest blocks. This technique allows us to control the size of the area that we're shading. So I haven't skipped any blocks, but there aren't any solid rings of one shade. By compacting the blocks you're using even more, you can have 2 light spots next to each other and then blend them into each other so that they overlap. The beauty of this is that it's not supposed to be perfect. It doesn't follow any super strict rules, but this does mean you're gonna have to practice. Another thing you can do with this technique is control the shape of the area that you're shading. See, in this example, I'm shading in more of a teardrop shape. And then in this example, I'm shading in a square, manipulating how fast our shading goes from light to dark based on what direction it's going in. You can see in this example of the square shading, it gets much darker, much quicker going down and left than it does up and right. When people texture with multiple colors in Minecraft, we often do one of 2 things. We'll blend the colors by transitioning through a tint or a shade. Essentially, we make both colors brighter or darker so that they're more similar. But if we want to transition from these 2 colors without passing through the shades or the tints, we have to find blocks that are roughly the same brightness, but in between them in terms of hue. I was able to find these 3 colors, which are roughly in the middle of this shade of blue and this shade of green without getting too much darker or lighter. Just a quick side note, blending colors and making gradients like this takes some knowledge of color theory, or at least a decent eye for color, so if you guys want, I can make a whole separate video about color theory in Minecraft, but it's way too much to get into in this video. So now that we can blend from blue to green without using the shades or tints of the colors, since we found a few colors that are in between these that don't change the brightness, I can explain how I would texture this square. I have blue on this side of the square and then green on this side of the square, and the darks and lights of each color are in opposite corners. We can start off by connecting the light to dark colors since we already have those here, so the blue and green sides are pretty easy. We just learned how to go from dark blue and light green, so I have a couple of our dark blue blocks and then I transition to green in the middle, and then I finish off the side with light green. On the opposite side, I take a couple light blue blocks, transition to green in the middle, and then finish with dark green. As we go inward another layer, our darks get slightly brighter and our lights get slightly darker. Then around here, I'm going to start shifting from green to blue or blue to green until it's all filled in. Then I go back and make some edits until I'm happy with it. Once again, it's never going to be perfect, but it really shouldn't be. And remember that from far away, it's going to look different than close up, so make sure to fly back and check your progress every once in a while. So even though in a sense we are just coloring with textures, that is what texturing is. So for an example of not just coloring, but creating the element of art that is texture in a build, I made this with one of my friends Junopi. It's a recreation of art by Jocelyn Carmez. We really liked how in the front doors of the barn it had this eye-catching old wood texture, and we wanted that in our build. So rather than coloring the front doors, we made thin strips of colors using fences, glass, and desaturated red colors that from a distance resemble the old wood from a barn door, thus giving our build texture. Alright, now that we have an example of texture, let's try to do something similar. I'm going to use these two references, mainly for the wooden section here and the building and environment from this one. For this build, I'm starting with some simple terrain. I used a Terragen command for the base and then added rocks in with an arc brush. Then I ran some replace above and below commands to get the base coloring and fixed it up by hand. Now in this picture I'm going off of, you can see how the wood in the middle is very worn down, so I need to use a lighter color for this and a darker color for the wood on the edge that looks less worn down. I grabbed some blocks that were roughly the right color and made vertical strips, and then I went over it with glass panes, some of which were half connected to a block, which I achieved with World Edit. You can see where I used the lighter colors, the wood looks much more weathered than on the edges. On the left, I threw in some oak blocks and yellow terracotta because the wood in the reference is much warmer there, and I mixed in some blocks from the right section because I want it to look very pieced together and rough. When we back up, I think that it definitely looks more like old wood than if we just used full blocks. I wanted to revise the rocks directly below the building to create the illusion of more jagged rocks. To do that, I shaded these boulders more intensely, starting with our darkest color and only adding highlights where rocks would be jutting out. When we back up, notice the difference in texturing between the left and the right rocks. If you were going to brush your hand over the rocks on the left, you could imagine that it would feel very sharp, while on the right it would feel very smooth. I went ahead and finished up this build. It's available for download on my Patreon if you're interested, along with the other builds showcased in this video. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.